All right. Again, Nick, thanks for taking time out of your day for this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump right into it, man. I'm excited. You've got an awesome resume. I'm very envious. So I'm gonna do my introduction and we'll go with
Sure.
the questions. So, viewers, let's welcome our guest on episode 7 of From the First Note podcast. This is Nick Morrison. Nick is a Berkeley trained professional guitarist and teacher in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. He's been a composer for film and TV since 2009, and his music has been featured in TV shows around the world. He has a very awesome YouTube channel that's been around since 2011 that's helped hundreds of thousands of students with free lessons, tips, tricks, and more. And I highly recommend it. He's also an Amazon #1 best-selling author of guitar books, a touring musician, and has played on albums.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, welcome. Welcome to me. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me, man. That's a
yeah.
great
No,
intro.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. It sounds like you've done a lot, man. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to be the guest. I want to know. Let's get started with your influences. Who are your influences that
Sure.
made you start play?
That made me start to play. I mean, I think like everybody our age, probably the very first time that I like really got the inkling like I want to play guitar and I really want to be a musician was when I heard Enter Sandman by Metallica on the eponymous Black album, Metallica.
Yeah,
And that was for me, like I was like, I can do this.
right.
Previously I had kind of played around with guitar and I, dabbled a little bit. There was always a guitar hanging around in the house somewhere. My mom had a beautiful old 60s or early 70s Martin. And, my uncle played, and I come from a pretty musical family. So there was always instruments around.
Mm,
But it was really that album that I was like, okay, yeah, no, this is the thing. This is for me. To go back even further, honestly, and get kind of silly about it, but like the first time that I ever was really like, I want to be a musician and I want to play guitar on stage in front of people was when I watched Back to the Future and Marty McFly
yeah,
played Johnny Be Good in front of the
yeah,
dance. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I want to do that. And
right,
it wasn't like I want to be a musician per se of like I want to be professional and make money. I was just like, I want to play in front of people and make them happy and make them move and like dance to the music that I'm making. I mean,
right.
that's me maturely putting it into words, but that's what I felt at the time.
Definitely. Somebody requested me to play that. I like to get on like TikTok live and just play guitar and stuff. And someone
Sure.
requested that. I played for 25 years, and I was like, no one's ever requested me to play that. And I was
That's
like sitting
funny.
there struggling with it, like, oh shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can fake your way through it pretty easily. But to
Right.
play it right, it's a bit more challenging than it sounds because the rhythms that Chuck played and the phrasing that he had is quite unique to his hands. And
Yeah.
if you haven't really listened to it and kind of studied it, it's not, 100% right. Although I'm not a huge proponent of that. I've played in cover bands and wedding bands and corporate bands and all the rest of it throughout my career. And I've never been one for learning things note for note. I can, and I
Right.
have done, I have played in tribute bands and I actually play in one now. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a thing, and I get that. But if you want to be a musician, in my mind, it's like you should take the framework and mm, the skeletal pieces, or like the real tricky, not tricky, excuse me, the real specific licks of a solo or fills or the song itself,
Right.
and use those and highlight them, but then also kind of incorporate it and make it your own, which sounds like a cop out, but it's really not. I truly
Yeah.
believe that improvising is the heart of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, then beyond the Black album, it was cats like Brian Setzer, um, and John Petrucci from Dream Theater, um, and who was a huge influence on me.
Right.
And guys like even like Zach Wild, Kirk Hammett, obviously from thing. But when it comes to songwriting and playing, I think Dave Mustaine was a really big influence as well. And I mean, again, that's still in that thrash genre, but these are the guys that really shaped my early playing. And then it was later on, I found, players like David Glinlow, and who else? Oh, Guthrie Govan,
Yeah.
and the Memphis Monster. What the heck's his real name now? And I'm blanking on the name, but
Yeah.
another guy kind of like really into Sean Lane. Sean Lane, Marty Friedman, and of
Mm.
course, that whole vein. But then, of course, there's like the whole jazz side of things. Like when I was at Berkeley, I obviously, you go there to study jazz, modern music in general, but jazz is the core curriculum, right? So you
Mm.
learn, all the different players there, and I think the cool thing about being in that atmosphere was having such exposure to so many talented guitar players. Like
Yeah.
I was not, you know, I don't know. I'm pretty humble. I don't think I was ever the best guitar player in my little town that I grew up in, but I was pretty good. But you
Yeah.
go to a situation like that and you're like, wow, okay, no, I'm really just like middle of the road. I have a
Yeah.
t-shirt somewhere where it's like world's okayest guitar player.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question because I remember being in high school as in a rock band, a metal band, whatever you want to call it, and
Yeah.
two of the guitarists were so good that I actually just stepped away from it. They're like, "You sing good, so you sing." I was like, yeah, you guys take care of
Sure.
the guitar parts." And
Yeah.
one of them did go to Berkeley for a minute, and
Cool.
he was telling me, he's like, usually when you see people going to college, just people walking around with book bags. No, Berkeley, you got like guitar cases. I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
that sounds like heaven. So tell me what Berkeley was like. Don't
Um,
don't trim any fat, man. I want to know all about it. It sounds awesome.
that was definitely the vibe, like you'd walk up Boylston and you'd see a string of guitar players with guitars on their back,
Mm,
in the back, the old backpack, guitar pack. The mono cases hadn't come out at that point, so it was like the old school, just like fabric crap
yeah,
cases with a little bit of padding. But
yeah,
and then the guys that were a bit more serious or had maybe more high end guitars had them in like hard cases that they would travel with, like suitcases. But the guitar department there is actually, it's funny because it's the when I was there, I think there were 3,600 guitar students,
it's a lot.
which is crazy because the college itself at that point, I want to say, was maybe around 8,000, 9,000 students in terms of the student body. So it wasn't huge. So like a full third or even more were guitar players. And
Wow.
then you had, your saxes and your clarinets and your trumpets, and the vocal department was the second biggest. Just
Mhm.
picture all of the teen girls typically that wanted to be, pop stars, the next
Yeah.
Christina Aguilera. So that was the second biggest department, was the vocal department. And
Uh-huh.
then I think piano behind that, and then all the rest of the instruments. But yeah, that was the best part, honestly, of studying there, was being around so many other like-minded, brilliant musicians, both students and professors.
Right.
And it was just really inspiring, and being able to, if you wanted to, you could lock yourself in some form of rehearsal room or another for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and
Yeah.
just jam with people and learn from people and whatever. And of course, you had to go to class and you had to do all that kind of stuff too. But
Yeah.
you know, that is really the bonus of being there, and having the exposure to that level of talent, to be able to learn from them and work with them and pick people's brains and go, "Okay, well, why did you play it that way? Why did you phrase it that way? Or why do you use that fingering? Because I don't think of it like that." And then you go, this is the reason, and you're like, "Oh my God," and it opens up a whole new part of your brain. Um, that's you know really, I think, the best part of the experience. And then long term, it's the connections in the professional music business, and even outside of the professional music business, because a lot of people, even though they go to study music, don't necessarily go into music as a career, because it is just a college like anywhere else. You can go and get a teaching degree from Berkeley. You can go to a music therapist degree from Berkeley. You
Mhm.
can go get like a theory composition degree, like these sorts of things, and then kind of move out of the music business traditionally, as we would call it.
Right.
So having that network of people to call on and talk to, I've got buddies that are in bands that play for artists that are artists themselves, that work in post-production, pre-production, every facet of gaming and entertainment that you can possibly think of. And it's really cool, where if I have a client that comes to me and says, I need XYZ, and I'm like, you know what, that's not really my lane, but I do know somebody that would probably fit that, and I can
Right.
make a call or send a couple emails, and then usually have a good referral in place, and I've got a good name, and I've got a good relationships with people where they trust me to be able to do that. So
That's awesome. Like what years were you at Berkeley?
early 2000s.
Early
So I was
2000s.
there. Yeah, I was there during the boom of Facebook. and which was interesting because at that time there was no such website, obviously, and then when it started it was just for college kids. So I
Yeah.
believe it originally was MIT and UMass only,
Yeah.
and then Berkeley, and then Harvard, and then maybe Boston College, something like that. And you
Yeah.
had to get like an actual physical invite
Yeah.
on a piece of paper with a code, and
Mhm.
like, log on, and then away you go. So that's, a long time ago. And so I was there for that, and I was there for the historic Boston Red Sox World Series win, which was an absolute gong show, or sometimes, as we like to say around Calgary, a goat rodeo. But yeah, I mean, it was a good time to be there. I feel like it was like really the last vestiges of the old world
Yeah.
pre social media and internet and stuff, which
Yeah.
I'm actually pretty thankful for.
Right. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
Yep. I actually remember that because I had that awkwardness of I never went to college, but I remember like one of my best friends had to give me something. I can't remember. You said something like a slip of paper. It was some type of
Yeah.
physical form. I
Yeah.
think I used his college. I think he had a couple
Maybe his
college
college ID.
emails.
You had to have an ID, I think, at one point.
I had to do that to set up a Facebook. And everybody's like, "Oh, I didn't know you go to college." I'm like, "I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a carpenter.
Yeah. There you go.
I'm a 19-year-old carpenter."
Yeah.
But yeah, were there any people that went on to became famous musicians there when you went?
Um, I mean, other than the major stories that we know about, I mean, John Mayer hit it big, I think, what, 2002, 2003, something like that. He'd only spent a year, maybe 18 months. So he was a little ahead of me,
Yeah,
but he was kind of like, we were there ish around the same era. So I mean, obviously that's a huge success story. In terms of guys that I know, or gals that I know too, I don't know. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I don't think any of them have gone on to like have huge solo careers in the English speaking world. I know
yeah,
one of my friends, she's Marlena, and she does, I want to say, where is she? And she's in Brazil, I think.
mm,
I think that's right. Yeah, because she speaks Portuguese. So yeah, so she's in Brazil, and she does some level of performance and music there. She's a solo artist and she sings,
yeah,
but like very traditional Brazilian jazz, pop jazz, that kind of stuff.
right.
But really pretty much just in Brazil. She's never gone like worldwide. Like she doesn't tour or anything like that. But yeah.
What was like a typical day there? Because anytime I think of something like Berkeley, without ever
Mm.
being in there, I just think of like the movie Whiplash or something like that, where you know,
Um,
sitting
I
there.
mean, that movie was not far off,
Mm,
but you also have to remember that that was like, so there's sort of three schools, right? So, or well, there's more than three, but like in terms of that intensity of study, there's like Berkeley, then there's New York College or whatever it was that he went to, maybe even Juilliard,
yeah,
and then there's West Coast, like MIT, GIT. And they all kind of have their own different flavors and moods.
mm,
But typical day, I mean, it would be like wake up. Um, I don't know. I've always been a pretty early riser, so I was always up around 6, 7 o'clock. I'd wake up, have a cup of coffee, hit the bathroom, and then get ready and head out to class. And it would be like uh, whatever, some English or creative writing or some bullshit I didn't care about.
right.
And then I'd have a small break, go home, get my guitar, and then I would either have ensemble class or private lesson
Mm,
or some other, so like maybe arrangement or band or whatever it happened to be. And then that would be kind of the bulk of the afternoon. And then I would have like my own private personal rehearsal time
yeah,
in a rehearsal room, and then I'd grab some dinner, usually meet up some friends. There were a bunch of restaurants that were really close,
yeah,
and I don't know if they're all still there or not, but like some crappy pizza or some really cheap pad thai or whatever.
yeah,
And then evenings would be um, more rehearsal, band rehearsal, either so ensemble for class and credit, or rehearsal of your own project. And then you'd be home by 8, 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock, something like that. Wrap up any other homework you had to do, blah, blah, blah. Maybe go out to the bar, get a drink, whatever, and then come home and crash out and then do it again the next day. I should mention that I actually also went as, I don't know, you would call it a mature student, but I was like 24 4 when I went. So like I was of age that I
Yeah.
could go to bars and I could also go to the liquor store. And so I was very popular for parties and stuff. I got invited to pretty much every party,
Yeah.
which, you know, I look back on now and kind of go, I wish I partied maybe a little less, but not really. Cause like I
You
said,
were the pusher man.
yeah, but like that's how you meet and get to know people in your network, you know, and um, it's good to be able to relax and kind of have that social barrier taken down a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes when you're playing with, especially like Berkeley musicians, I would probably need a beer or 5 to loosen up.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you know, there was a lot of and I mean, I have no qualms about talking about it, but there was a lot of pretty heavy or extensive drug use at that time too. So because the pressures for especially performance majors, and I'm talking not maybe not necessarily the guitar department, but like and I think it's just kind of part of jazz anyway. So like Oxy was making its rearing its head around that time because you end up with a lot of tendonitis and arthritis and carpal tunnel and that kind of stuff coming up. So guys would abuse that, gals too, whatever.
Right.
ADHD meds, there was a whole sort of black market of like what's the one called
Adderall.
what's that? Yeah, Adderall
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So like trading Adderall for Oxy, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the older student, and I mean, of course I say older, but like, you know, so that would have been like the 3rd and 4th years, or as sorry, it's been a while. I haven't lived in the States for a long time, but the, so you guys go, what's the first year called? Something sophomore, junior, senior. So like usually the juniors, what's that? Freshman. Yeah, freshman. So in Canada, it's just like first year, second year, third year, fourth year.
Right.
But anyway, we're less interesting that way. But yeah, usually the juniors, but it was usually the seniors that would fuel all night rehearsal sessions with Coke. And that was kind of not a great scene. And it was one of those things that I saw and I was like, okay, I get the short-term play in terms of being able to stay up all night and practice and be creative and do your thing and put in more hours, more reps, right?
Right.
But I was like, long-term, I don't see that as a really great play for 25, 30 years down the road where you either have a heart attack and keel over or still need that stimulant to be able to be creative. And so thankfully I never really got into it. Like I said, I like alcohol, but I like to think I was a bit more responsible with it.
That's good. Yeah, it sounded like Boston was, well, it must have been most of the East Coast because right around that time, my little city that I grew up in, I was a little further south in West Virginia, a little place called Huntington, and it had a little bit of a music scene right about that time, and I was hoping to be a part of it, but
yeah,
drugs screwed up a lot of that, and it's still screwing up my
totally
right now. It started from like Detroit.
Yeah.
They make like a beeline straight for that area, and I bet to Boston too. It's just it makes sense to go that way. Pills, heroin, crack, coke, whatever.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I don't think I ever saw any crack. I'm sure it was there, or meth or something like that. But it was, like I said, it was usually that black market because you got students with prescription Adderall, which is really just an amphetamine anyway.
Yeah.
And some with prescription, and it was a lot of pill trading, like that kind of thing. You know, at any one point or another, I like if I had needed or wanted something, I'm like, okay, I can make a couple calls and have it. You know, which is wild because these are like, again, you know, these are like 18 and 19-year-olds. You know, with like some serious drug addictions, and I'm just like it's wild, but
that's a hardcore drug.
Yeah, you know, and thankfully, I think most of them have made it out okay. You know, obviously, I can't speak for thousands of people, but of the people that I, you know, associated with, everybody's, you know, either cleaned up their act or had kept their nose clean and have made it out okay. You know,
all because of jazz. It's jazz's fault.
Yeah.
So when did you start as a touring musician?
I think actually before I went to Berkeley. So I'm like primarily self-taught. And my family, as I mentioned, is quite musical. My grandmother was a concert pianist. And she stopped doing that when she, you know, got married and got pregnant, as you did back in the 40s, early 50s, right? And so then my grandfather, so he was a steel worker, and he is like just like now. Back then, if you are, you know, on the union wage and you got more than one mouth to feed, you got to
Yeah.
have some side hustles. So he
Yeah.
would buy and sell and repair cars, buy and sell and repair, you know, just tools and things like that, whatever else. But he also played drums, and so he had a little side hustle wedding band, and he played drums, and they would go out usually every weekend, like Friday, Saturday night, and play weddings and bar mitzvahs and that kind of thing.
Nice.
And so the music was, you know, kind of always around. And then of course my uncle is he's a professional jazz musician. He's actually based in Toronto, and so that kind of thing too. So I was just like always drawn to music, and it was always part of my life, and I always knew, I think, like I said, like I always knew something with music, it was going to be somehow part of my life, if nothing else than just being part of like community choir, or, you know, band at my church, or like these sorts of things.
Right.
But when you know, when the time came that I really discovered guitar, because like I said, that Black album, that would have been 90, 91, 92. So I was like
Right.
11, 12 years old. um I was just like, this is my thing, and I just literally dedicated 6, 8 hours every night to just sitting and practicing in my room, just trying to figure it out, because you got to remember, at that time too, there really wasn't much internet.
Right.
Like, it was just the very beginnings. Mostly it was BBS, like bulletin board systems, so you could use your dial-up modem, call in, and get access to like a file list, and it was like DOS, right? So it would be like
Yeah.
you'd put in a command, like, you know, directory, show directory or whatever, and it would show you all the files that you could download, and be like, oh cool, enter Sandman, just because we were talking about it already. Enter Sandman.tab or whatever, and you'd be like,
Yeah.
download, and then like 45 minutes to an hour and a half later, you'd have
Yeah.
it, and it was all dashes, dots, and numbers,
All right.
not completely out of order, but usually fairly out of order, and about 80% incorrect, you know. So it was really a matter of trying to figure stuff out on your own. And so I just spent a lot of time, and I used to actually stretch my tapes out. I can't remember how I figured it out. I think I remember hearing somebody talk about slowing music down, and I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Cassette?
Yeah, so I would take cassettes,
Ah,
and I would actually stretch them
yeah.
so that they essentially, maybe I even just
Slow
knew, because tapes have a tendency, if you play them enough, they wear out, and eventually they're
Yeah.
right. So I would intentionally stretch them out, and of course, and it was an inexact science,
All
and
right.
there was no keeping the tone and the key the same.
Yeah.
So as you stretch it out, not only are you slowing it down, but you're lowering the key. So I would have to like retune my guitar to the key that I've stretched the tape to, and try and figure out, you know, lines and songs and whatever.
Yeah.
And I would do that. And so um, by the time I hit like 15, 16, I was good enough to be out and playing in wedding bands, bar bands, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. And so I was, you know, playing out fairly regularly by the time I was graduating high school,
Mhm.
and into university. So I actually studied in university here in Canada first before I went down to Berkeley. But um, you know, I was doing that thing, and then I was out on the road. I think in my second or third year university, I was out on the road with some Canadian artists, and playing those gigs, mostly in the kind of the country world. One of them was her name was
Mhm.
Crystal Gage. I'll never forget. She was a real sweetheart, and we had a lot of fun. We opened for a ton of like bigger acts like Gretchen Wilson, and I think we opened for the Bare Naked Ladies, and like just like tons of stuff. A lot of cool gigs, and a lot of small gigs too, because she also did like, she was an up and comer. I think, you know, again at that time, this is like, you know, 24, 26 years ago, something like that, right? So she had
Yeah.
like a minor hit on CMT. I think it reached like number 22 in the charts or something like that. So I mean, it was a big deal, but like it was not like superstar level, and also in Canada, not USA, right? So like it's a very different world here.
Right.
But that's when I started, and then, you know, kind of finishing up my first degree and kind of getting out of college or university here, and kind of going, you know, I think music is really the thing that I need to do, and I think if I'm going to do it, I should go to the best school possible, and like meet as many people as possible and do that thing.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did, and I headed down there and studied, and kind of the rest is history.
That's awesome. So, um, someone who's never toured, I mean, that's on me, but yeah, yeah,
You can always do it, man.
I know, right? I'm one of those, like, I don't like to play covers, which I can go out like anytime I want to play some
Sure.
covers, but I want to play originals, and
Yep.
I want my band to be tight and rehearse everything. But there's always something, somebody looks at somebody's girlfriend or wife the wrong way, or somebody drugs.
Oh, band drama.
Yeah, old stuff, or you just don't mesh very well.
Yeah.
Um, excuses, excuses, excuses. But
Sure.
how is that touring even? Like you toured with the person you just mentioned,
Yeah.
and you're in a band, and it sounds like it went over the small time thing. Like, so you guys didn't like go in on a bus together, or a van or whatever.
Well, I mean, I've kind of done the gambit of all of it. She was, uh, what did we do? She had her own transportation, and then we sort of put together like a caravan. So we had like two big vans like that would haul a trailer or whatever, and then she had like a
The
nicer,
peasants, the
yeah,
peasants.
and then she had like a nicer thing, and then we stayed in like motels and stuff, so like it wasn't like we were roughing it completely. And then I've done that, and then I've gone all the way up to like tour buses and stuff. I've never toured with like an airplane or anything like that, unless
Yeah,
you count moving to Japan, which I did, and I lived over there for about 5 years.
nice.
um but it is what it is. And I think the biggest thing, and I'm sure, as you talk to more musicians and probably even guys that that have toured already, it's it really is about the hang, being cool to hang out with, being chill, keeping your head level, not overreacting to stuff, because you're in pretty tight confined quarters. Like, even if you've got a really nice tour bus, you're still in a small space with people, and you're
Yeah,
with them in that space for up to 14 hours a day as you're traveling to the next city, or maybe a couple days in a row, and yeah, people can get ornery, but if you just keep your head level and relax, and you just go like, hey man, we're not saving the world here. We're just playing music, and we're lucky to do so.
right.
And as long as you got a group of people that all recognize that and appreciate the music, appreciate the opportunity, and appreciate each other and the sacrifices that you are all making, because it's time away from friends, time away from family, time away from things that matter to you in your house. Like um uh lucky enough that at that point I didn't really have a whole lot of commitments.
Yeah,
But I remember in that particular band, the pedal steel player, we were all in our 20s, and he was like in his early 60s. So like he had a wife, and he had children, and he had grandchildren. Of course the
yeah,
kids were grown up, but like I remember him talking like, man, I can't wait to get back home, because I got this project to do, I gotta fix this, it's my granddaughter's birthday on the 4th coming up, or whatever.
right,
Like, so it really hit home that it's like, oh yeah, this is cool and amazing, but it's not real life,
right.
if you know what I mean. And yeah, there's been permutations of all of that stuff. Some band drama. Mostly, I think I've been really lucky and not run into too many complete dickheads. But there have been stories.
You're lucky. Let's put it that
Yeah, yeah.
way. I am a dickhead magnet, I think.
Not,
Um, so, like a typical schedule, you go out and you tour what for anywhere from like a month to 3 or 4 typically, but like
yeah,
away from home.
yeah.
So your apartment, your house, your rent, your mortgage, how is that even balanced? Like, who's there taking care of it?
Yeah. So like it really depends on your individual life circumstances, shall we say, right? So like at that particular point, like I said, I really didn't have um anything tying me down. So
Right.
I kind of lived out of my suitcase. I kind of crashed at friends' places, slept on my mom's, well, in my room at my mom's house, occasionally, as the time would be, kind of do the move in and move out a couple times.
Right.
Um and then just be out on the road. And I mean, out on the road, you're either sleeping on the bus or you're sleeping in a motel. If you're lucky, you get your own room. Usually you're, sharing with
Right.
somebody. But again, when that's happening, the tour production is paying for it. It's not you. So you can survive on that, $15, I think it was like $10 or $15 per diem that we would get for like food and whatever. What I mean? Again, that's 26 years ago. So like adjust for inflation, it's maybe like 50 or $60 a day, something like that, whatever.
Mm,
And
okay.
those are small scale tours too. Like I've got buddies that have played in much, much, much bigger. I've got a friend of a friend who I believe is, Yeah, so he plays for Katy Perry, or played for Katy Perry. And
Wow.
those guys, like, you're staying at like 5-star hotels and like much nicer accommodations, and you're making like your per diem is $200 a day plus, you know, whatever your actual rate is, you know. So
Right.
there's all sorts of varying scales to that. And then like DIY tours that I've done, you know, where it's not, we don't have like a big van, we've got a minivan,
Yeah.
and we're hauling a U-Haul, and all of the band, like all 5 guys, and all of our stuff is all in the one van with one tiny little tent trailer in the back, not tent trailer, but like that size.
Right.
And that we couldn't afford to stay in motels, so we were sleeping on each other, you know, across Western Canada, between, you know, Winnipeg to Vancouver
Yeah.
in -40, you know, on a winter tour. Which, by the way, if you're not from Canada, and I know you're not, but I'm just in
Yeah.
general speaking to your audience, don't come to Canada in the winter to tour. It's a bad idea.
You got to wrap the tires with chains and
Oh
wear them.
yeah, yeah. Especially if you're going over the mountains, so like over the Rockies and down into Vancouver, it's extremely treacherous. And in
Yeah.
fact, it's law that if you're traveling over those mountain passes between November 12th and March 28th or something like that, you must put chains on your tires.
Yeah, like a lot of people don't even know what that is. And I'm
Mm.
from West Virginia, so I'm used to just
Oh,
like
you know,
zero,
yeah,
10 below
yeah.
maybe.
But
It's
y'all get
probably
snow
10.
there, right?
Yeah, you got
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, you gotta weatherproof your house, your car. You gotta like
yep,
clean the antifreeze, put in antifreeze in there that won't freeze.
yeah,
That's below zero and all this stuff.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah. Our windshield washer fluid, we have to make sure we buy the -40 rated stuff,
yeah. Otherwise, it's
right?
gonna blow out a bunch of icicles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or no, just the lines completely freeze up and you
Yeah,
can't wash your windows, right?
favorite plus.
Yeah.
Hardcore, man. You mentioned you played on albums. Are there any
Yep.
albums? Like, what kind of albums have you played?
Uh, I've done a little bit of everything. Mostly, a lot more of my work has been like commercial production music, so like for film, TV, adverts, that kind of stuff. Played on a couple albums. I've done a like a hard rock album. I'm actually you're gonna think this is ridiculous, but I have an NDA. I'm not allowed to talk about it. Other than the fact that I can say yes, I've done it, but I'm not allowed to say when, where, or who it was for. So what I can tell you though is that it's an industry standard practice that um, a band will be signed, typically a young band,
Hmm.
and they have a great image, they have a great sound, and there is something about them, usually the front man or the front man guitarist or the front man piano player, whatever, that has it.
Right.
And the band has been signed because of that factor. But they are unseasoned, untrained musicians, and they can't really play very well, and they can't play in a studio uh, environment where it
Right.
counts, right? Where minutes are dollars. And so what will happen is that the record company, usually the producer, will be tracking and having the guys do stuff during the day, and then come 6 o'clock when they all, you know, go to the bar and whatever, they'll bring in studio musicians and they'll play from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and cut the entire record, you know, because then it's able to be done. Now that's an extreme case. It doesn't get done that quickly, but like
Yeah.
the idea is, and you can hear stuff like online about Rick Beato and talking to the guys that played on like the Steely Dan records and like these sorts of things, where you would have sometimes 3 or 4 different guitar players, 3 or 4 different piano players coming in, whatever else, and they would cut an album based on the best takes of like all of the best players.
Right.
So stuff that I did is pretty low level, and again, it's just here in Canada. So you know, it's funny because I'm like, well, you know, probably wouldn't even matter because nobody in your audience, I'm sure, has ever even heard of them. But again, just because of contractual obligations.
Yeah.
But that was an interesting experience, and I think that was like maybe 5 days of tracking, or like 5 evenings of tracking. Because it would be mostly like going in, hearing what they had played, and then playing clean versions of it. So like I wasn't really necessarily coming up with my own parts and being a quote unquote true musician. I
Right.
was more of a interpreter of music that had already been written. So much more like a classical player, right? Except in this case, I was just listening to it and reproducing it rather than reading it off a page.
Hmm.
Although that can be done too.
That's funny that you bring that up because it slingshot in my mind, my memory too. Let's see. It's probably 2003, 2004.
Mm.
I don't know if you've heard of the band Shinedown.
Yep.
So Shinedown, they come to our little town, Huntington, West Virginia, and they play at a festival called X Fest. It's their first album, and it is my style of music at the time. Now I've kind of grown out of like that mainstream, like new metal, rock, whatever.
Sure,
But
yeah.
that first album, I could still probably listen to that first album. Like the singer Brent, I think it's
Yep.
his name. Very awesome.
Sure.
I was like, ooh, he's got like a Chris Cornell thing got going on. But we went to see them live. They were great. And, me and my buddy are standing there, and we're probably 16, 17 years old. We turn around, and there he is in the audience after they got done playing. And we're like, holy shit, man. We
Yeah.
were really blown away by you guys. You guys are awesome. And he was really cool as we were in that band at the time. And he talked down to earth with us. Like, he was really nice. And he was telling us, is like, yeah, so if you guys want to get signed, you guys are young. You don't look like mutants. So, whatever he said.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. But he goes, what they did for me is they signed me. Shine Down is me.
Yeah.
The other guys and his musicians were there with him, and where I was like talking to them, I was like, oh, that sucks. They're like, these guys are my touring band. So they signed me because of my voice, and then they wrote a record for me. And it wasn't even these guys right here. And I was just like, so you guys aren't even a legit band. And I remember, I think it was probably like around that same time, I learned the same thing about Nine Inch Nails. I was just like, it's all Trent. That sucks. I like all those guys, but I still love Nine Inch Nails. But,
yeah. Well, and I mean, for me, I think that's really cool because Trent really created that band on his own and all of that music on his own. Like, that much like, Prince or Tom Scholz from Boston, it's like that one man production army, as it were. But being able to, for me, that just is like, it ups the respect level for that individual musician. But also being on the flip side of it, I know it sucks because he really underpaid his guys. And I think it was the guitar player's name. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he ended up going off.
Patrick.
Right. And he formed Disturbed. No.
Filter.
Which one?
Filter.
Right. Yeah. Because, he was like, hey man, I want a bigger piece of the pie. And Trent was like, fuck you, go make your own band. And he was like, okay, well, I guess I will. Right. And they ended up being quite popular as well. But I mean, that's just kind of the way it goes. Not every band has all four contributing members.
Yeah.
And often they don't. A lot of times it is an industry fabrication. And I mean, a lot of that goes along in, country music. If you think about it, it's like, there's the country star, and then they have studio band, studio writers, staff writers, and producers. And then that will be a completely different crew than the people that go out on the road, right? Where it's road dogs.
That's actually like a point I've never really thought of because I don't listen to country music. I dislike it a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm one of the few. But people that do like it, I wonder if they look at it and they go, I like the sound. A lot of people listen to music that don't know shit about instruments. And I wonder if they say, hey, I like the sound of this song. I wonder if that guy that plays a guitar on that album is on that album. Could be that way.
I don't know. I don't think most people really care, to be honest, because most listeners of music, I think, listen to the melody, listen to the lyrics, look at the face on the album cover, and that's really all there is to it. Most folks don't understand that it takes or it can take an army of people to produce a record, in terms of the studio musicians themselves, but also the engineers and the producers and the editors and of course that's gotten a lot less as technology's gotten better and better. But I mean, if you look at a classic recording like the Beatles or AC/DC or hell, even Metallica, the Black Album, there were a lot of people that worked on those records, not just the four guys that you see on the record itself. And of course there's credits and whatnot, but I don't know. I think it's the more serious fan that would probably really get into that, or guitar guys like me. Cause if you look at like country records and all of the big ones from the 90s, basically Brent Mason played on, who is, if you're a guitar enthusiast, you probably know the name, even if you don't necessarily know his work. But, he's like the first call Nashville session guy. Basically he played on everything from Brooks and Dunn to Garth Brooks to, Winona Judd to like whatever, all of those guys, like he was playing guitar for them because he's that good. And yeah, it's just a different model. Very similar to, I think, what's kind of happened with pop music over the past 20-ish years, where they went, oh, that's how you make money doing music. All right, cool, we'll do that too. And now you see the pop world where it's the one star and the band doesn't matter,
Right.
and you've got 1,000,001 song producers and writers, and off you go. But
Yeah, there's just one guy, I don't know his name, but he looks pretty pretentious. I'll just put it that way. But
sure,
he's the guy that writes a majority of like hip hop or R&B like beats or whatever.
sure,
And like he's amazing. Like you can't deny it. He's got like one of them huge MIDI keyboards, and he'll come up with anything and everything.
yeah, totally,
He goes into the studio at like 1 in the morning with like the faded shades and
yeah,
like a $400 T-shirt. You know what I mean? Just
sure, yeah, absolutely,
why not? You're probably stinking rich, but
yeah,
yeah, that would be fun. Like at this age, and being a husband and a father, I'm just like maybe being crammed like sardines in a tour bus with a bunch of sweaty guys wouldn't be that fun. Maybe
yeah,
just a recording artist would
yeah,
be for me. But regardless, I'm almost 40 now, and it's definitely something that I want to continue and always will. I'll always write. I'll
yep,
always do something like this that is with music because I've been doing this for about a month now.
sure.
It's fun
Well, you'll
talking to
get better and have more fun with it and expand your audience and all the rest of it. And the more
yeah,
positive feedback you could get, the more you'll want to do it too, right? So,
definitely. Okay. So how did
sorry.
this is a big one. Like I have a cousin that does this as well, but it's just like one of those distant cousins I haven't talked to her in a long time. But you mentioned that you have composed for TV and films. How did
Yeah.
that get started?
So it's interesting because like that's a great segue from your last kind of what we were talking about, and you being 40 and having a wife and a kid. And
Yeah.
I was living in Japan in the late 2000s and met my wife there. Who's actually Canadian also and white. Not that it matters at all, but just it's like all my buddies give me a ribbing all the time. They're like, you moved all the way to Japan to meet a Canadian girl. Yeah, I mean, she's from Alberta, I'm from Ontario. Like it's two different worlds. Like we never would have met, right? Like
Yeah.
it'd be like you living in West Virginia and meeting somebody from Oregon and falling in love. Like what are the chances, right? So
Right.
because it's that same kind of distance. But anyway, so like I was living in Osaka and working in and around Osaka and Tokyo, doing some studio sessions there and playing for a couple artists, playing backup guitar
Mhm.
and having a great time. But it was time away from my then fiance. And I was like, we were considering coming back to Canada to kind of really start our life, get married and buy a house and like kind of do all of those things.
Mhm.
And I was like, man, what am I going to do? Cause like I've been away from, like, at that point, I'd been away from Canada for a number of years. And I was like, I'm going to have to start all over again. Like the 2008 financial crisis hit the US pretty hard. It also hit Canada really hard.
Yeah.
Basically, everybody that I had known in my network of like live musician players, studio players, and like even in the management circle, everybody had moved on to new careers. And I was
Mhm.
like, shit, what am I going to do? And I had a friend who I knew from Berkeley. And, I remember chatting with him and saying, yeah, we're thinking about coming back, but I'm not really sure what to do. Like, what do you have any kind of suggestions for me, whatever else? And he's like, man, I think you should look into production music. And I was like, what do you mean production music? And he's like, well, music for TV shows. And I was like, oh, okay. Like writing soundtracks. He's like, yes and no. Like it's less than that. Like, he's like, you don't have to score anything and conduct an orchestra. It's more like grab your laptop, grab your computer, create music, record it well, write something that sounds like it could be on the radio, and then license it to TV shows, because there are a huge amount of productions that want to have. So have you ever noticed that all movies, especially now, it's really prevalent now, but every time um, a director wants to make the audience feel something, they start playing that Beastie Boys song, like I can't remember the name. Camouflage, not camouflage,
Sabotage.
sabotage.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, oh, or it's the Red Hot Chili Peppers version of the same song.
Right.
Or if there's like some sort of mob thing, they start playing Layla, the end of Layla from Eric Clapton and
Yeah.
Derek and the Dominoes, right? Because these songs have been associated with such pivotal scenes in major pictures.
Right.
It's a real easy and cheap, quote unquote, cheap trick to get your audience to feel a very specific thing. So here's the rub. TV shows generally have much smaller budgets than big motion pictures for Marvel or
Right.
Martin Scorsese or whatever. So they can't afford to license Layla for their TV show. So they'll come to a production movie house or a production music house and say, hey, we need a sound that sounds like this, but will only cost us $500. Do you have something?
Yeah.
And so if anytime you're watching a movie and you hear, like, especially like two characters in a car listening to the radio, and it might be AC/DC, it might be Rod Stewart. It's probably a guy like me with a home studio that's actually recorded that specifically because they've had a need for it. So anyway, to get to circle around, so my buddy says, yeah, you should look into production music. I've been working with this company called Taxi, which is an independent A&R agency located in California. And I'm not here to promote. I mean, I can give you my honest opinion of them, but I'm not like paid by them, and I don't want this to be a commercial for them at all.
No, go for it.
But he was like, give them a call. It's a membership service, and then you have to pay for your reviews, but then they forward your music to music industry professionals that are looking for specifically the stuff that you do. And so that's how I got my start. And I was lucky right off the bat. I got signed to a music production house, a library that needed some specific things that were in line with what I was doing. And then from there, it's just sort of snowballed. Like that one connection led to another connection, which led to a third connection, which then honestly, probably 95 to 98% of the stuff that I do now is in some way or another shape or form connected to those first couple of industry connections that I made in like 2008, 2009, which is just to show you how small the industry really is. And the fact that, like I said, if somebody comes to me like and says, hey man, we really love what you did on, the thing that, I just did a track for the NFL, for example. And, man, we really love this track you did for the NFL. Can you do something for, I don't know, the volleyball network or something? And we really want like EDM. I'm trying to think of something like I don't do, right? I could, I'm sure, like music is music, but like I'm not an EDM producer, right? So like I'd be like, hey, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, but I'm not an EDM guy. I think you should talk to so and so, and vice versa. You end up with a network of people that kind of like know what you do, and can kind of, we refer work back and forth to each other whenever we can. But yeah, so that's how I got my start. Sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, I'm very interested in that. So, like, can you tell the viewers and myself like what movies or shows you've been featured on?
I wish I could. So what ends up happening, I mean, I can tell you a couple. I've got some stuff on, and these are older shows, but like I had some stuff on True Blood, which I think was an AMC show, or maybe that was HBO. Had some stuff on what the hell, Entourage, which is another is that HBO? But beyond the first couple of placements, I basically stopped caring. Which sounds stupid, but so what ends up happening is, because my music is not like a feature of the show, it's like such a background thing. Oftentimes, unless I know the episode that it's going to be on and when it's coming out, I miss it completely. And then I just see it in my quarterly statements that come in and say such and such a show, used for this amount of time, here's your payout. Okay, cool, awesome. So
that was going to be my next question. Like, how does the payouts work?
Yeah. So sorry, just to wrap that up. So what ends up happening is if you end up with your music licensed to a reputable publisher, a reputable music library, or publishing house, or production house, your music will end up being licensed around the world for any number of things. And because I'm not out there actually personally selling it myself, I don't really know, and I don't really have any control, and I don't care, to be honest. I'm happy that they're doing that, and I don't have to. So I can just create stuff and give it to them, and they either say, yeah, we'll take that and try to sell it, or no, we'll pass on that one, whatever. And then you get to a point where sometimes things will fall on your lap, specifically like the Harley Davidson thing that I did a few years back now. Anyway, so they approached me specifically um, and said, we really like your work. Can you create something for us specifically? They had a web ad. What were they calling it? I can't remember off the top of my head now. But they were like, this is kind of what we want. This is the style that we're feeling. Da 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 da. And I created it. Off it went. Cool, great. And then that was done. But yeah, so the payment, to answer your follow-up question. So one of two things will happen, or sometimes both if you're really lucky.
Mhm.
So sometimes the publisher or production house will approach me saying, or someone, and say, we'd really like XYZ created, and here's the brief. Really, like we have a contract and we need this sort of stuff created, and they may pay a small fee up front to cover production costs. Most times they don't. And in fact, I would say probably in the last 8 years, that's not the way it works anymore. Nobody pays up front.
Yeah.
But it used to be that they would pay some sort of money upfront to help you kind of get stuff going or whatever. And then once they place it with a show and it airs, the production runners for the show, well, I mean, it's the penny counters and so forth. They fill out report sheets, and on those sheets are statements to, in the USA, it is BMI and ASCAP, which are the performing rights societies in the US. And
Yeah.
then that happens, I want to say every month. And then they report, I think it's twice per year, to SOCAN, which is the Performance Rights Society in Canada.
Mhm.
And they basically are responsible for dispersing royalties. So that statement gets filed, and then the production company pays the money. Actually, not well, the production company and the distribution. So like your NBCs, your CBCs, ABCs, Warner Brothers, whatever, they
Right.
pay the fee to the Performance Rights Society. The Performance Rights Society will collect it on behalf of SOCAN, who collects it on behalf of me. So twice a year, BMI and ASCAP report to SOCAN, and then SOCAN then distributes that money to me. So it's a bit of a long cycle,
Right.
and which is why it really sucks now, especially for new guys that are coming up. If you're not making any money up front in terms of a release fee or a purchase fee or a production fee, it can be 18 months before you see any money for the music that you write.
Wow.
So it really is a long game where you put in your time now with the expectation of, I will get paid in about 18 months. But here's the kicker: you will make money on that piece of music that you've composed as long as it continues to air.
Right.
So like the dream, of course, is to be the guys that wrote "I'll Be There for You" for Friends,
Yeah.
and have a show in syndication for 30 years, and basically you never have to work again. Like that's like it's the golden ticket. Like those guys are
Yeah.
millionaires, right? The Rembrandts, I think that was the name of the band. And so I haven't been that lucky yet, but you keep writing and firing away, and at
Yeah.
any one time I've probably got, I don't know, 130 or 140 tracks on air at any one time,
Wow.
and at some place in the world.
Mhm.
And then you can make some decent money.
Is this like music and doing that, for instance? Is that your full time gig? Is that your bread and butter?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I really feel like, especially post 90s, unless you're a big time signed artist, your main bread and butter, like I say, yeah, it's music, but it's music education, it's music for film and TV, it's music books, it's music YouTube channel, it's a little bit, I don't teach live in person anymore, but it did do that.
Yeah.
It's recording sessions here, it's maybe producing other bands, like that kind of thing. um
Mm.
but yeah, it's my full-time thing, but it's many full-time things. Have your fingers in a bunch of different pies, and then that way, if one of those revenue streams dries up, you're not SOL.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much like
That's
if you have a regular job, they lay you off and it's like, oh shit, I don't have anything.
right.
Right. So especially when things, now I'm lucky because I've got that cushion built up of production music that really just works for me 24/7, whether I'm doing anything or not.
Mhm.
um I'm lucky I've got that cushion, but I still like to keep many streams kind of going um at once, because I mean, again, you just, if you're a creative individual, which it sounds like you are, you want to be doing, you want to be busy, you want to be creating, you want to be doing stuff, like if I just, I don't know, checked out tomorrow for whatever reason, turned my brain off, and yeah, okay, I could continue collecting, passive income for the
Right.
next couple of years. But I mean, it eventually would dry out, right? Because like again, I haven't had that golden ticket TV show yet where it's been like ching ching ching.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, great. So you need to keep filling that funnel, as well as setting up, savings for retirement and or renovations and stuff for your house and upkeep of life and vacations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
are you comfortable with talking about like your biggest payout when it comes to the TV and TV shows?
Sure, if you want. I mean, the funny thing is that I don't well, no, I can tell you one.
No.
So
Yeah.
what's that, sorry?
Do you even know like what
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about it. I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I really actually know, because
right.
I don't really keep track. Like, I mean, I know what my incomings and outgoings are,
Yeah.
in general, although incomings are a bit of a surprise every month because you never really know, or every quarter, because you never
Right.
really know how many reruns or airings a show or with a particular piece of music is going to have.
So in your
Um,
bank account, it goes in like every quarter.
yeah, every quarter, and then of
Yeah.
course I have other things that come in monthly, and then side gigs and things like that.
Right.
Um, But I think the biggest payout I ever had, this is funny because I was talking about the EDM thing. So this was probably 10 years ago, 24, maybe 11 years ago,
Mm.
where I was approached again. It was like a friend of a friend knew what I did and knew, my music and knew me,
Mm.
knew that I was good to work with, and said, "Hey man, we've heard about you through so and so. Can you write us this piece of music that does this?" And they wanted, it was like EDM, like electronica dance type stuff.
Right.
And I gave them my usual line, like, "Hey, thank you so much. I'm really flattered that you thought of me. That's not really my wheelhouse. I think you should talk with my friend Bobby, and he could probably take care of you because that's his thing. Like, he's really
Right.
good at that." And they're like, "No, no, no, we want you. We want you." And they kept pestering me. And so finally, I was like, "Okay, well, here's what." And this was like a buyout deal, and which that means like a 360-degree buyout. So they basically wanted me to create them a custom track. They wanted to own it, and then they wanted to be able to do with it whatever they wanted with it for the rest of eternity. I was like, okay, cool. So I was like, sure, fine. It'll be 28 grand. And they're like, okay, we'll have 50% deposited to you within the next 4 hours. I was like, oh shit. And so then I had to actually do it, and it turned out to actually be a pretty good track, and it was really cool. I mean, for what it was, it's not my style of music, but it was a great learning opportunity for me.
Mhm.
And kind of allowed me to upgrade my studio and buy a bunch of gear that I needed, because I didn't have anything for producing electronica. So like I had to like buy a bunch of gear, figure out how to use it, figure out how to make this stuff that they wanted, and then turn in a track. And luckily they ended up not wanting too many edits or changes or anything like that. But that was a good learning experience for me, and also like in terms of like valuing yourself as an artist, because like if somebody wants you bad enough,
Mhm.
they will pay pretty much anything you want. Like, it's funny because like $28,000 sounds like a lot, but like after taxes, after holdbacks for so holdback for taxes, and then payout for gear that I needed and whatever else, like I really at the end of that walked away with like, I don't know, 18, maybe 16 to 18
Yeah.
grand, which again also sounds like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I remember after the fact, I was like, wow, I made like $28,000 in one. Like, that's also A, 6 months worth of work.
Yeah.
And B, I probably could have asked for more because they didn't haggle. You know what I mean?
Did
So like
they snap to it like, oh, okay.
yeah, it's like, so these things that you kind of learn along the way, right? Like if they're coming to you, they want you. So that means you've
Mhm.
got a little bit of an upper, to quote George Costanza, you've got hand.
Right.
Um, and you can use that to your advantage. But yeah, so that was probably the biggest single payout I've had.
Mhm.
Um, the biggest payout that I think like over, and it's probably more than that by now, is a piece of music I did in 2009 that got signed to Warner, which then is now in some way or another tied to Disney,
Wow.
I think, right? And it's nothing crazy. It's like a small sound effect thing. It's about 30 seconds of music, but it's
Yeah.
consistently been in use, and I've consistently made hundreds of dollars from it every quarter for 15 years. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably my single largest earning piece of music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody like myself wanted to get
Mm.
into that type of in that type of world, is there a website? Like, where do you even begin with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can look up. There's a lot more now than there was when I started. Taxi's still around. I would highly recommend them.
Mhm.
If nothing else, to read up and join. They have a free user forum as well. If you still remember forums, they actually have a very active forum.
Okay.
And you can learn about production music. You can learn about industry terms and things that people are looking for. There's a really supportive community there of people that are all TV and film composers that will critique your music. Like, you can, upload something and they'll be like, oh, you can work on this on your mix, or check out
Mhm.
this, or maybe dial out this range in your EQ, like, to make it sound better, like all of these kind of things. And they're super helpful, and they ask nothing for it. So that forum is entirely free. Taxi itself, like I said, is a paid service, and people go back and forth about having to pay to be a member to something like that or whatever else. But I just look at it, I'm like, okay, well, I have to pay my professional union dues. I have to pay for life insurance. I have to pay for, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a fee of doing business. Like,
Right.
what's the big deal? There is I'll have to look it up. Like, another friend of mine uses these guys. I think they're called Beyond the Queue.
Oh,
Um,
uh, that sounds familiar. I want to
Beyond
say,
the Queue. Is that what it is? I can't remember. I think that's what it is. Beyond the Queue, something like that. Because that's what we call like music queues. So it's
yeah.
Beyond the Queue. So it's a again professional network of composers and songwriters and music producers for film and TV. It's a paid, like, premium community,
Mhm.
but that will get you in touch with other writers, and that's the big thing too. I think the big key for me, like I said, everything kind of gets back to those first few couple of connections that I made at Taxi. Finding people to work with, finding people that you vibe with, that you are able to make great music with,
Yeah.
and together, through the force of multiplication of your talents, you get more opportunities. And I think those are probably the best way to get into that world, other than living in a place like New York or LA or Vancouver or London, where you could physically knock on the door of a production studio and say, "Hi, here's my demo." They'll probably kick you to the curb, but that is the best way, like, is in person. Like, if you can meet somebody and
Yeah.
talk with them and then hand them a demo, or, say, "Hey, shoot me an email and I'll send you some stuff." Like, that's really the best way. But beyond
Mhm.
that is like those online forums and communities, like that kind of thing. Um,
Nice.
because there are a ton of other websites that I will say are not necessarily predatory, but I am suspect of their motives, because
Yeah.
they will be like, "Oh, we're a production music library, and we've had music placed in, MTV and Much Music and CTV and NBC and ABC and this production and this movie and whatever." And they may very well have, but they have a completely open door, open submission policy,
Mm.
which I'm like, okay, so if there's no barrier to entry, that means you have probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tracks, and nobody's actually listening to them.
Right.
Right? Worst case scenario is a place like that with an open submission policy that also asks for some sort of membership or fee to submit. In which case, I'm like, don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Because you actually want those libraries or production houses that do have that sort of minimum bar, because that means if you meet that minimum bar, like, they know what they're talking about, and if you
Mm.
can meet that minimum bar, then chances are you're going to have a better shot at actually having your music licensed.
Right. Seems like this isn't the first time I've ever talked to somebody about it and like looked into it, and it was just like it's just like marketing your
Yeah.
song and shit these days. There's just
Yeah,
yeah.
well, and the other thing too is that it's not for everybody. So I can tell you for a fact, like, I've met guys and bands that have never had anything happen for them, because they're similar to your point earlier, where you're like, I want to make my own music, I want to make it the way I want to have a tight band, but it has to be original and it has to be mine. That's cool. But if there isn't already interest in your band from a crowd or a fan, or, like, that kind of thing, it's going to be very hard to place that music in a production, because chances are it's going to be, you know, not mixed correctly for TV. The vocals
Yeah.
are going to be too loud or whatever it happens to be, right? So it may not necessarily fit. And the other thing is that often, so that's why I mentioned about the taxi forums. They actually put out a free email every week as to what industry is asking for right now in terms of like real listings, real calls for queues, and
Yeah.
you can read. And it's kind of a skill to really learn and read what they're actually asking for. Because I remember when I started, I made this mistake too. It was just like, I've got all these great songs and I've got this killer band and I'm just going to submit it to like all these things. But
Right.
you're wasting your time because that's not really what they're asking for, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so there's often, and I'm not saying this to discourage you in any way, but I'm just saying sometimes it's not for everybody, because there's those people that just want to have their band and make their music the way that they want. That's not production music. Production music is learning to listen to the director or producer and know
Right.
what they want and give them the thing that they want slash need, because that's what serves the scene of the movie or the TV show,
Mhm.
rather than look at how great of a guitar player I am, or look how amazing my chord changes are when I write my songs.
Right.
Nobody cares about that. What they really want is something to highlight and bring up that emotional stakes for Jimmy and Jane when they are about to kiss, or whatever the scene happens to be.
No, I
So it's kind of a different thing, and it takes some wrapping your head around.
right.
Because the usual question that I get around then is like, well, isn't that boring? And don't you find it limiting? And like, isn't it annoying that you can't just write the music that you want and you have to write what somebody else asks you for? And I'm like, I mean, yeah and no. Mostly I find it challenging. It's an
Yeah.
interesting puzzle to try and
Right.
figure out A, what they want, and B, how to make my set of skills give them that thing that they want. And in any creative endeavor, I think, especially songwriting, and I'm sure if you've written songs, you probably have had similar experience where you sit down, they call it the blank page syndrome,
Mhm.
where you're like, I don't know where to start. Like I've got 10,000 options and I don't know which one to choose. So one of the cool songwriting tricks is to go, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to roll a dice and it's going to pick my key, and then I'm going to roll a dice on a feel, and like limit yourself to parameters,
Yeah.
right? And I have these 5 things to work with, and I can write my song using just this stuff. So sometimes limitations become very, very freeing,
Right.
if you catch my drift.
Yeah, it actually sounds like really fun to me. Yeah, because like it's not just prog rock and metal or whatever that I like to
Yeah,
play and write. Now that would be my dream, to go out there and perform that, and that be my gig, where I'm
totally.
so we're so like full scheduled doing that for my living that I wouldn't look into other ways to make money and stuff
Sure.
musically. But that what you're telling me sounds fun, because sometimes I get bored with the guitar. Sometimes I get
Totally.
bored writing in 7/4 and shit like that.
Hmm.
Sometimes I like pulling up a MIDI key and I like making like hip hop beats, and
Sure.
I use Logic Pro, so I mean there's a lot
Yep.
of like, really cool synth pads and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Do a lot of really cool stuff with that. So my computer is just completely plagued with like 40 to 80 different, like little maybe 2 minute long songs that are all just kind of
Nice.
like, yeah. I go under another name. It's
Yeah,
my project.
totally. Well, that's cool. Well, the funny thing too is like, you mentioned about, doing the prog rock thing, and well, there's really no money in prog rock, let me tell you.
I know.
Um, but I mean, the proof is in
All
the
the
pudding,
dudes.
What's that, sorry?
So you look out in the audience, it's just dudes, nothing but
Yeah,
dudes.
just a sea of dudes, sweaty, bearded dudes, ourselves included.
That's right.
Um, but like if you look at the guys like in Dream Theater, who are the very pinnacle of modern progressive rock, progressive metal.
Right.
um John Petrucci's got a signature whiskey and a signature beard oil, and a guitar endorsement,
Yeah.
collaboration with Ernie Ball. Mike Portney's got his drum endorsements and things. um James Labrie does some solo work and whatever. Mike Mangini was doing his art for a while. Like, they all have side gigs.
Right.
Look at the guys in Symphony X. I think the only one that's
Good name
making a
drop.
full-time living is Michael Romeo.
It's a
The
good
rest of
name
the
drop.
guys still, what's that, sorry?
So that's a good name drop right
Yeah,
there.
but like the rest of the guys still teach music and work at their local music store in New Jersey.
I'll
You
tell
know,
you one
so
band that's severely underrated that
yeah,
I heard recently that they still hold down jobs, and it depressed me, was King's X.
yeah,
Really
that's
good band.
it is sad and depressing, but I mean they kind of had their time 20 years ago, you know,
Yeah.
right? So, but I mean, again, it is what it is. Like the industry's changing, and it's one of those things where if you want to make a full-time living as a musician, and I'm kind of adamant in this, is like you've got to have your finger in a bunch of different pies. And I think
Yeah.
one of the reasons that bigger bands or any bands really do t-shirt sales and marketing and collaborations and whatever else is to make sure that they can tour, because that's the fun part, is like playing in front of people. Like honestly, I would do it for free. I don't play for free and I don't provide music for free, but like if
Right.
all else was equal, I would do it for free because that's how much I love it, and I'm sure you feel the same. um
Absolutely.
right? Like that's why we lug our amps in a tiny, Chrysler minivan with 5 of our sweaty buddies to the gig in the middle of nowhere that only 8 people show up for, to play the music that we love, but to watch those 8 people headbang, and that's a way better day than
Oh
going to
yeah.
the office and sitting behind a computer for 12 hours or 8 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, but that's, I mean, it's just the economics of it, because people aren't necessarily buying as much music as they were anymore. Although there are still, and there always will be, exceptions to those rules. If you can have yourself a really good fan base of like 1,000 dedicated people, maybe 1,500, maybe 2,000,
Right.
really, really dedicated people that will spend money on your releases and merch, yeah, you can have a pretty good career.
Yeah, because I mean, there are, for me, there's probably like 6 to 12 bands that, when they release a new album, I go out and I buy the CD. I
Yep.
want to look at the linear notes.
Oh yeah, totally.
Tool's one of them, even though I didn't really like that last album they put out or anything. But it's one of those. It's like you not only you expect to get a really badass album, but
Hmm.
the packaging in itself.
The
They've
packaging,
always
the artwork, yeah.
yeah, they've always done some pretty cool shit. And it's just like I want to own that. I want that piece.
Yeah, totally. Part of the experience.
Okay, so what inspired you to make your YouTube channel?
That's a interesting question. Money. So, okay. So like it sounds funny saying this, but like I'm an OG YouTuber. So like
Yeah.
when 2006, 2007, when Google announced Google Video was going away, and being replaced with this new thing called YouTube, because they had purchased YouTube, I was like, huh, well, that's pretty interesting. I better get on that. I was living in Japan at the time,
Mhm.
and my wife and I built a channel together. And basically, we toured around Japan and took pictures and showed temples and talked about how silly it was living in Japan and how funny Japanese people are and how funny we are living in there and like all that kind of stuff. We actually ended up with probably close to 40,000 subscribers.
Mhm.
And we were part of the first like rollout of the YouTube partner program for AdSense.
Nice.
And I was like, wow, this is great. Unfortunately, some things went sideways. We had a guy that decided that he wanted to, I don't know, be us or be part of us, or I don't. Anyway, I had to shut the channel down, and that
Mhm.
whole experience was left us a bit sour. And I was off sort of social media completely for a few more years, I think until 2011, when I relaunched, because I was like, well, this is dumb. I'm back in Canada and I'm composing, I'm doing stuff, and I'm teaching locally, but like that means I'm limited to, I don't know, a couple dozen students. And how can I reach more people? And I was like, YouTube's the way.
All right.
So I started doing that, and just as a way to get lesson material out there for people, I would provide links to students and say, hey, da 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 da, here's a, this week's lesson curriculum or whatever. And then if you follow this link, you can check out, I'll give you the demonstration on YouTube. And then that started gaining a little bit of traction. Then I was like, oh yeah, I can do this and make money on it.
Mhm.
Fast forward to 2019, and I finally hit enough subscribers, because there's enough like chubby middle-aged bearded guitar players on YouTube that nobody gives a shit who I am. um and so it took a really, really long time to like reach that same 1,000 subscriber mark, and
Yeah.
to reach revenue. And of course now I'm closing in on 5,000 subs now, so that's like another 4 years, or 5 years, I guess, almost. But it's been an interesting journey. But the shift happened kind of around that 2019 time when I started looking at it going, okay, well, and obviously into COVID times and all that kind of thing. But like I started seeing YouTube not so much as a way to give out free content and kind of have a YouTube AdSense thing, but I was like, oh, this is actually a way to advertise my business if my business is in anything really. So I can make free content showing lesson stuff or tips and tricks for guitar players, but then if I have a link to my website, which is on here, guitardojo.ca, I can sell books, or I can sell t-shirts, or I can sell further lessons. I can sell one-to-one Skype lessons. I can sell a course, like all of these sorts of things. And that's when things sort of really started falling into place in terms of a core education business for me. And it's been life-changing sounds too dramatic, but it has been life-changing in terms of my shift of focus from what I used to do to what I do now, and kind of the amount of automation and things that I've been able to set up in the back end so that I don't actually teach one-to-one lessons anymore. Because if you teach one-to-one, or even if you teach one-to-many, you're still tied to your time in hour blocks anytime during the day. So now if somebody watches one of my videos, likes what I do, excuse me, and clicks one of the links either to buy a course or a small course, or buy a book or something from my website or from Amazon, that's great. That's one piece of passive income. Or if they go and follow the big link and then actually buy like I have a full course available in an app that people can download onto their smartphone, then they can take lessons with me in their pocket at 3 a.m. if they want. And so that's a much better way for me to utilize and leverage my knowledge versus, again, that same one-to-one thing all the time.
That's smart, man. Like how often are you pumping out those videos? And,
so this summer, because we actually in the spring bought a new house and moved, and there's been some renos and I've had some projects. So I've been a little bit on hiatus over the summer. So the past couple months, I haven't really been releasing any new videos, but typically I'll put out one solid, like long form. And when I say long form, like between 10 and 15 minutes usually per week. And then that gets split up into anywhere between 5 and 10, sometimes more, but 5 and 10 short form YouTube shorts, but also TikTok videos and Instagram videos with titling and blah, 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 and tags and all the rest of it to, again, filter. You got to feed the top of the filter for, folks to come through and actually buy anything. But yeah, that seems to be a pretty good cadence for me. But there was a time, like really when I was pushing between 2017 and 2019 to hit that sort of 1,000 subscriber threshold, and then to really grow between 2019 to 2022. So that 3-year period kind of over COVID, I was putting oftentimes 3 to 4 videos a week.
Nice.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, like, in the viewers, you do music for a full-time gig, so I want to know, like, what is a regular routine schedule for you? Like, what is your daily routine?
That's a great question. I would say no 2 days are the same.
Back in 2020, our son came along. He's our one and only. And, I'm one of those that I wanted to always be in a band and do music and everything. But then I was like, well, I also need to make money to afford all the equipment that I want. So I ended up not getting a bad job. I got a good job that paid me decent, to where I was like, oh shit, I can't leave it now. So I screwed myself.
Sure. Yeah.
That's some advice to give to the young kids. Go get like a shitty job,
Yeah.
that you don't care
that
about.
You hate, but that will take care of your bare minimum essentials.
Yeah. That where you just leave it in the dust when you get the first offer.
Yeah.
So yeah, like knowing like what I'm doing now, pursuing this type of thing 24/7, I actually tackle it as a job, and then Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 and everything. So I want to see, like, you are a success in my eyes doing like the music gigs. And so I would like to know and tell the viewers, there's might be people out there that are in our situation, that are in their 30s, 40s, whatever, and have kids, and they're stuck in that cubicle and they need to get the hell out of it.
Totally. So I laugh when you ask me that, because I've had ADHD my whole life.
Yeah.
And I'm very much a go, 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 go. And if I think about it and know that it needs to be done, I need to do it right now. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. And that's been really how I operated for most of my 45 years on this planet, up until sort of COVID time, when things were slowing down, things were, not as prevalent. And that's one of the reasons that I really started focusing more on YouTube, my teaching business, writing books, that sort of thing, because production for film and TV dried up. So I still got residuals from reruns and things, but there was no new business coming in. It's one
Yeah.
of the things that a lot of people, and then of course, like live touring musicians, for example, or session musicians, there was nothing. So I was like, that was also part of like why YouTube, I was like, I really need to make this work. And when you start anything, at least in my experience, especially if you're working for yourself, because it's you and you alone against the world, you basically need to put in 36 hours a day. Like, because I needed to learn marketing, I needed to learn website design, I needed to learn online merchandising, I needed to learn scripting, editing, filming. Like, I needed to hone all of those things, and it had to be done yesterday.
Yeah.
um and so what ends up happening was, and especially when I sort of started the Guitar Dojo website, I was offering one-to-one lessons via Zoom, and then that changed into one-to-many. So I would do group master classes with up to like 8 other people, so like me and 8 students. And so you start making these little adjustments that like make your day more efficient
Right.
as you go, because I was like, I can't keep working this many hours. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you basically figure out a way to get it done at first, no matter what. Like, whether it's you're working from 10 to 2 a.m., or you get up at 3 and work till 6, and then you have a shit shower and shave and go to work, or you do it on your lunch break, like whatever it happens to work for you. I think I'm not really big on prescribing a set schedule for somebody, because I know for me personally that never worked. Um, and for me, it's more like, just get shit done, whatever your goal is, and every day do something to move the needle towards that goal. If you're at least able to do one thing per day aside from your day job toward the goal of whatever it is that you want to do, you've won.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if you can speed that up and get 2 things, 3 things, 4 things, or 5 things done every day towards that goal, you're going to get to that goal faster.
Yeah.
Right. But you got to do what you got to do, right? Because we all have lives, we all have homes, we have mortgages to pay, we got kids to take care of, mums and dads to take care of, maybe, like whatever it happens to be. So like that is what it is.
Right.
Then you get to a point where it either breaks and you really need to fix it, or it breaks in a good way and everything just floods through, and suddenly you're like, oh shit, okay, yeah, I made it, I'm good. Right.
Yeah.
Which I don't think you should ever relax and rest on your laurels, but
Yeah.
there will be a point where you're like, okay, I've done enough, I don't have to keep working 36 hours a day anymore.
Right.
Now I can really design what I want. And for me, I've gotten to that point where I'm like, okay, I've always been an early riser. I think I mentioned that. It's probably part of the ADHD, but like,
Yeah.
I'm up at 5:36 every morning. I kind of have a little morning routine that I like to do, in terms of some light exercise and some coffee and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get to work, and I work from 8 to 12, and it's going to be different every day. Sometimes it's composing, sometimes it's recording, sometimes it's doing a remote session, sometimes it's actually doing an on location session, although I don't do that very much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
um Answering email, like whatever it happens to be, that work that day needs to be done.
Right.
And then my afternoons, I'll usually book out for more creative work. So I find my focus work, I do better in the morning when I'm like fresh, and then
Yeah.
afternoon, for whatever reason, I've kind of gotten all of the boring crap out of the way,
Yeah.
and in the afternoon I'm a bit more creative. And then I also carve out time. I usually go to the gym in the afternoon, and then so I do that, and then I'm done by 4:30. I very rarely work past 5 anymore,
Yeah.
because my wife also works a normal schedule, so I try to align my timing with her,
Yeah.
so that we can spend time in the evenings and on weekends together. And that's kind of where it ends. Luckily, like I said, I'm in a position where I don't have to, if somebody emails me at 8 p.m. at night, I don't have to jump on that email and respond
Right.
anymore. Whereas 15 years ago, absolutely, I was glued to my phone, and the second I got an email, I was responding, and yes sir, no sir, yes, no
Right.
problem, I can fix that, or I can do that, or whatever it is. And now I don't have to do that. So I mean, like, I'm really lucky that way. But again, that will change and be different for every single person, right? Because
Right.
there's also nothing wrong. Like if you're a person that just likes to hustle all the time, 36 hours a day, and
Oh,
that makes you happy, then do that.
yeah,
You know what I
definitely.
mean? Like there's no shame in working hard and continuing to do so, even if you quote unquote don't have to.
Yeah, you had a damn good point there too. Like I don't know if it's everybody, but I feel the same way. Like, just get up, have yourself some coffee, and those first 4 hours, like, I'm always just ready to crush whatever.
Yeah.
I have to have something. Like, I want to do something in like those first 4 hours, especially like creativity, recording, writing music, or whatever. That's where most of it comes from. And then I think everybody has that same. If you wake up around the same time, like 2 o'clock, you crash, and
Right.
then 5 o'clock comes around, you're like, time to go to the gym. And then when you get back from the gym, all right, time to eat and get all fat and sassy and go to fucking sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned you have guitar books. You have books on Amazon. You want to talk about those?
Yes. I stupidly didn't get them out of my bookcase to show.
Yeah.
So I've got two. Actually, I guess there's three. Um, so there's like a basic beginner's guide to theory. It's basically like everything you need to know as a beginning guitar player.
Mhm.
And then I have my first book, which is the one that hit the bestsellers list three different times.
Hell yeah. Nice.
It's called Guitar Fretboard Memory Magic. So it's a really simple and effective way to memorize the guitar fretboard, which is one of the things that I see most young players and even intermediate players. I think it's like the kind of the one thing that holds most people back. And it's funny because it's not even necessarily knowing where the notes are so that you can read music, but it's knowing where the notes are so that you can understand your instrument, right?
Right.
It's be like what would be a good analogy? Like I want to play football, but I don't know the rules. I
Yeah.
kind of know the game. Like I know everybody lines up and there's a ball and then something happens and somehow we
Mhm.
make points,
I
but I
did
don't
that
really
for two
know.
years, man.
But you know what I mean, right? Like if you don't actually know the rules of the game, it's really
Yeah.
hard to play it well.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't know the rules of the guitar neck, it's really hard to play it well, right? You can fake it, but it like you won't get there.
Mm.
So memorizing memorizing the notes of the fretboard, I think is foundational to everything else. And so that book did really well. And there's actually an accompanying video course that goes with it because
Nice.
some people just aren't super great book learners.
Mhm.
But you've got the book, you can read it and see the illustrations in the book, and then you can watch me do it via video. Cool, awesome. There's an audiobook version of it too for people that prefer audiobooks.
Mhm.
And then the other one is a complete beginner's guide to music theory for guitarists.
Mhm.
And so this is like the music theory book that I wished I'd had 35 years ago, because most music theory is written from so I'm talking like canonical Western 12 tone music, like eight
Mhm.
notes of the Western scale, 12 modes, blah, blah, blah. Or sorry, eight modes, 12 tones. You
Mhm.
get where I'm going. But most of that was written codified in like the mid to late 17th century. So like 1600s, right?
Yeah.
And by guys like Bach and, um, you know, all the rest of them. And it was written for organ, and it was written for piano, or the precursor to the piano, harpsichord. And
Right.
so this theory is organized in such a way to help you learn piano. And we've not changed that in 400 or 500 years.
Crazy.
So why are we as guitar players learning piano theory?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense. Now, theory is theory because it's just the theory of how music works. So it's applicable to guitar. But the way you teach it, the order in which it is taught, and the way we talk about certain concepts are different for guitar players than they are for piano players. There are certain analogies that you can align and we can both understand, but the actual application to the instrument is vastly different. And so that's kind of the frame that I wrote that book from. It's not been as successful because theory is not as not a sexy of a subject.
Yeah.
But for the folks that have purchased it and have read it, by and large, the emails that I've gotten, the feedback I've gotten was like, wow, this is really good, man. Like it really made sense to me finally, why these things are the way they are. And it's
Right.
written in plain language. It doesn't get into like crazy, humongous, ridiculous detail. I've like split it into 3 sections. So it's like, here's what you need to know. Here's what's nice to know. And then here's like your extra level crazy ninja shit. And that's like actually the name of the chapter.
Yeah.
Next level ninja shit. Because it really, it really is like theory is a toolbox that you keep in the trunk of your car. You should really only be pulling it out if you have a flat tire, right? You don't like it's people get so caught up in like, I need to learn theory. I need to know all of the stuff. I need to know every single thing, the permutation and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you don't. You just need to know the basics of how it works. And then once you've got that, then you can just keep going and use your imagination and you'll be good.
Shit, you might have another purchaser right here, 'cause I've been playing, I don't know, 24, 25 years, and
Yeah.
all I do is I tabs, get on tabs. You made me laugh earlier. Like, I don't know what you called it, but it's the exact same thing. Like us or me learning music, it was always dial up, web TV. It was like really cheap.
Sure.
We
Okay.
didn't have a computer, so it's literally
Yep.
like a keyboard you plug into your TV and it's dial up. And it would take 20 minutes to get onto a guitar tab website, and then boom, just like you were saying,
Yeah,
it's
totally.
lines and the numbers, and they're all jacked up. And
Hmm.
that's what I learned from. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
totally.
mostly that and by ear, because as you said, it was perfect. Is about 80% of it was wrong.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's something to be said for that too, because if you think about the way that most music has been learned in the rock genre, which is really new, by the way, I think people forget that like rock guitar's really only been around for like 60 years, right? Maybe call it 70 if you want to go all the way back and be like, well, it was 52 and it's now 2024. But like
Yeah,
50,
yeah,
60 years, like that's as long as rock guitar has been around.
right,
So in the beginning, guys would kind of show each other a couple scales and like, here's the chords that work or whatever. And then the rest of it was just like listening and watching and kind of going, oh, that's cool. I don't know how he did that, but maybe it kind of sounds like this. And it gets close. But that's how you get guys developing their own style.
right,
Fast forward to now when you can go on YouTube and have a guy like me or somebody else show you exactly how to play something. You just learn that exact thing the way that that teacher's shown you how to do it, which may
mm,
or may not be 100% correct, by the way. But either way, it's immediate access to knowledge and you don't develop any of your own ear or style. And this is why you've
right,
got like 16-year-old kids that can play Eugene's Trick Bag by Steve Vai from Crossroads,
yeah,
like note for note perfect.
oh
But
yeah,
then you ask them to play a simple, 12 bar blues and they're like, huh?
oh, it's
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and
yeah,
I'm not taking that anything away from anybody. Like being
no,
technical and being able to reproduce technical stuff is great. And that's a cool skill to have. And it's a cool thing to be able to do. And there's a certain style of music that works really, really well for. But if you want to
right,
be a more well-rounded musician, or if you want to be a composer, if you want to write songs or whatever else, it's a different set of skills. If you
right,
want to be able to improvise with other musicians live, it's a very different set of skills. Like I can't tell you the number of like I sound like such an asshole. I've stopped going to jams in my city because they're not jams.
yeah,
They're let's all get around, the PA in the bar and we'll all plug in and agree on a song to play that we all know. And then we're going to play it usually badly. Um, but like, it's covers of, and I'm like, well, but that's not jamming. Sure. You could start with that, but then let's go round and round and we'll keep playing the changes. And now you solo and now you solo and I'll solo, right?
right,
That's a jam, right? Or let's just pick a random series of chords and like make something of it, right? But most people don't want to do that. And again, that's why I'm like, I sound like such an asshole because it's like it's just different levels of expectation. And for most folks, if especially in the amateur musician scene, like that is a jam and it's fun. Okay, cool. And I think there's something to be said for that. But if you're looking for something else, I think there are more avenues to go after it than just the sort of typical thing that's happening nowadays. Also, that's not to say that I don't like tab because I actually think tab is probably the best way for guitarists to learn music, which I outline in that book. And there's a whole section on tab. So, like there are ways to take the old and the new and mesh them together and move forward. And that's
yeah,
part of one of the things that I like to do. I want to make music fun for people, not, oh my God, you need to study and be a real studious academic person to be able to excel at
yeah,
guitar. Cause it's like, no, they call it playing music. It's not
right,
working music,
yeah,
right? It's not slaving music.
All right.
It's playing. Let's have fun. Let's play.
You gotta keep it fun and
Yeah.
loose.
Yeah, totally.
So can you share your wildest story while touring, or all of your jamming around with people, maybe starting bands and things like that? Craziest thing that's ever happened to you?
I've told this story before, and I'll tell it again because I mean, it bears repeating. It's a funny story. I used to play. So I grew up in Ontario. I'm now in Calgary, Alberta, but I grew up in Ontario, and I went to University of Windsor, which is right across the border from Detroit. In
Mhm.
Detroit, I don't know if you know, but like there's a really good punk scene there, really good indie music, really good EDM. Like they have a huge EDM festival every year.
Mhm.
But there's also a huge contingent of sideshow performers and circus folk
Mhm.
that live in Detroit, come through Detroit. There's very close to like Chicago, like that little corridor in between Detroit and Chicago. There's
Yeah.
like a whole like freak show circuit. And so we were playing at a gig one night at a strip club, and the promoter was one of the preeminent sort of freak show promoters from across the river, and he had put this show together. So there were like, I don't know what the PC term for it now is, but midgets that were like on stage, had costumes.
Yeah.
There was a midget stripper, and there was a lady strongman, or
Yeah.
a strong woman, I guess. There was who was also a bearded woman. And this was like way before like the LGBTQ trans movement. Like she was legitimately a woman, but she had facial hair, not like a beard like us, but like wispy hair on her face,
Right.
because she obviously had a hormone imbalance. Um, and what else? There was a fire eater, and guys that like stuck um,
Swords.
swallow swords and stuck nails in their noses, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we were playing our hard rock,
Mhm.
kind of heavy metal light, and all of the sideshow stuff was going on and whatever else. And then of course strippers were dancing on the poles. It was a hell of a show. It was a great time.
Sounds
Sold
like
out show. I can't remember. We were raising money for something. Um, I don't remember what it was, but anyway, so kind of toward the end of the night, it was announced that there was going to be Jello wrestling, and we were super stoked.
Yeah.
Well, what they didn't say was that the Jello wrestling was going to be between the lady strong man, or the strong woman, and
Yeah.
some volunteer from the audience. Well, nobody would volunteer, and I was like, well, fuck it, let's go. So I volunteered. So,
Yeah.
obviously put my guitar away or whatever else, and wrestled with the strong woman in the Jello. Got my ass handed to me consequently. But yeah, it was a funny time. And of course, yeah, the midgets, of course, were standing around and screaming and hollering. Yeah, it was a kind of a crazy time.
Yeah, that sounds like a wild ass crazy show right there. Shit. All right, so I'm going to end it with this question here.
Sure.
I want your opinion. So you've been around the music world for some time now. Let's say Van Halen never existed, but there's a group of young guys right now in their early 20s, and they can play like those cats, and they have a dozen of amazing songs written and rehearsed. They haven't recorded yet or anything like that, uh, but they have a few shows under their belt, but they're hungry, and they haven't played shows yet, but they're hungry. They've rehearsed and everything. They're ready to go. They're ready to play live. What advice do you give for them to lead them into the right direction in this day and age of technology, and how
Mm,
music lovers consume and discover new music? Like, what paths should they go?
yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting because I haven't had an opportunity to break right, break my own career in a modern time.
Right.
But I can tell you from the things and the trends that I'm seeing, because I try to stay on top of it as much as possible. And obviously, you know, for my part, I'm in my mid to late 40s, so I'm pretty much past it. But I can tell you, in terms of like breaking as a musician, but I can tell you from what I've seen, what they would need to do is get out and start playing in front of people. That at the core of it all is the main bread and butter for musicians, especially if you're a band, if you've got a hot look, if you've got a hot sound, if you can really play your ass off, get out and show people and make people dance, make people have fun.
Right.
And then they will tell more people, and then your next show will be bigger, and the show after that will be bigger, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. But here's the kicker. What you need to be doing is filming on your phone content for TikTok from
Right.
those shows. and curate that to make it look like the most fun, the most exciting, the coolest, the best sounding, the coolest looking lights, you know, the most boobs in the audience, or whatever, you know, genre. Maybe it's dudes, maybe they make, you know, gay erotica EDM or something, like whatever.
Right.
Your audience, expose and show your audience in your TikToks, the people that you want to attract,
Yep.
right? Is what I'm getting at. And show those people having a great time at your show, and show you having a great time at that show. And then also film content that is you behind the scenes getting ready, talking about how excited you are, talking about how much fun it's going to be, talking about how much you can't wait to meet your fans
Right.
at the show and hang out with them and have a drink, or hang out and have a sandwich, whatever it happens to be. Again, you know, like each milieu is a little bit different in terms of the way you're going to interact with those people. But
Yeah.
that I see is the biggest way to connect and find new musicians and new fans now in today's age, because you know, as much as YouTube's cool and it's got a huge reach, I think you should be there too. But I think TikTok's really the way people are finding more new music now than ever before.
Definitely. And like the entire time you were talking, I was just sitting there thinking, like, what if Pantera was the band that was coming out? You know, like how
Right?
crazy their home videos were. Like their TikTok would be fucking insane.
Yeah, it would be blowing up,
Yeah.
and probably a lot of the videos would get banned. You know?
Yeah.
But
Right.
like, but that's what that platform excels at, is it's putting you in front of the exact people that need to find you. I don't know how they do it. That algorithm is super smart.
Yeah.
But the people that need to be connected to you and your music and your message will find you there. And that, I think, is the most powerful thing that platform, specifically for musicians, can do for us, is put us. I mean, I don't. Maybe he's not from West Virginia, but you know, there's that guy, the redheaded dude. What was he came out? He has got he plays like an old jazz box kind of style guitar, but like a tin guitar with like the speaker. That's not jazz box, but anyway,
Steel
Richmond,
acoustic or something like that.
kind of, yeah, he's like Richmond, north of Richmond, something like that.
I think you're the guy that's just standing out in the woods screaming.
Yeah,
Singing.
out in the woods, right?
Yeah, I don't know what part of Virginia. I think it's Virginia. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's Virginia, but like, talk about blowing up overnight. One song that resonates with people, that gets in front of the right amount of folks.
Right.
Boom. And of course, he's got his whole own story, and I'm not going to tell that. It's not, that's not my place to do it. But like, it's cool proof of the pudding, man.
That's a good answer, man. I think rock and metal for sure. You have to get out there.
Yeah.
You know, the other genres you can kind of sit at home and
Totally.
make stupid videos or whatever and become popular, and then go out with a fucking DJ and a microphone and charge $20 a ticket. You know, I'm not going to say, I'm not talking shit, but you know, if I'm going to go to a show, I want someone to perform.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's definitely it. Well, Nick,
Cool,
man, thanks for this awesome chat. Really informative. Thanks for the chat. Thanks again for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always nice to be able to share some knowledge.
Definitely. Everybody that's watching, you can go to guitardojo.ca, and I'll have Nick send me a bunch of links, and I'll be posting it down below and on YouTube in case you want to see
Totally.
all of your stuff. It'll probably just take forever to go through all.
There's not that many. It's really easy to find too. It's just like whatever the platform is / Samurai Fingers or @ Samurai Fingers. I've been around long enough that I've like got that captured on basically everything.
All right, man.
Cheers, brother.
Thanks again, man.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
You too.